Everyone thought the billionaire's only daughter was dying. Doctors said she had no more than 3 months left. Her father, devastated and desperate, tried every treatment money could buy, but nothing worked. Nurses came and went, but the girl stayed silent, weak, and fading fast. Then one day, a new maid was hired. She seemed ordinary, quiet, careful, just doing her job. But as days passed, she noticed things no one else did. She paid attention, asked questions no one dared to ask. And then she found something that changed everything. What she discovered didn't just give hope. It uncovered a secret that had been hidden for years. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Richard Wakefield was once a very successful businessman. He owned many companies and was known for his sharp mind and leadership. But after the tragic death of his wife, everything changed. He stopped going to work and moved into a large, quiet mansion far away from the city. The place was modern and full of expensive things, but it felt empty. Richard rarely spoke to anyone. He kept to himself and avoided the outside world. His only focus now was his daughter, Luna. She had been diagnosed with cancer when she was still very young. The treatment was hard on her body. Her hair fell out and she became very weak. Richard stayed by her side every day, taking care of her, trying to make her feel better. But even though he was always there, Luna didn't speak much. She stayed quiet, distant, and often stared at nothing in particular, like she was lost. Richard tried to bring happiness back into Luna's life. He spent a lot of money hiring the best doctors and therapists. He brought in art teachers, music instructors, and even animal therapists to see if any of them could get a reaction from her. He bought her books, toys, and anything she showed even a little interest in. But nothing worked. Luna didn't smile. She didn't play. She didn't talk. Sometimes she would just sit for hours in her room or by the window. Richard felt helpless. He wanted to fix everything like he did in business, but this was different. Luna wasn't just sick. She seemed unreachable. No matter what he did, he couldn't bring back the light in her eyes. The silence between them was heavy. Richard didn't know how to break through it. He missed the little girl who used to laugh and ask questions. Now she was like a shadow of her former self. Every morning, Richard followed a strict routine. He would wake up early, prepare breakfast for Luna, and check her medication. Nurses came in daily to help with her care, but Richard insisted on being part of everything. He watched over her health closely, keeping a notebook of her reactions and progress. The house was always clean, meals were always on time, and every detail was under control. He thought that maybe by being organized, he could keep the situation from getting worse. But even though everything around them was perfectly managed, nothing felt right. The silence in the house was louder than any noise. Luna rarely spoke a word. Sometimes she would nod or shake her head, but most of the time she didn't respond at all. Richard kept trying, hoping that one day something would change. He was always looking for signs of improvement, but the days went by slowly, always the same, without any real progress. Richard often blamed himself for everything. He believed that if he had done something differently, maybe his wife would still be alive, and maybe Luna wouldn't be suffering so much. He remembered the happy days when their family was complete. Those memories hurt now. He kept old family photos in a drawer, but he couldn't bring himself to look at them. They reminded him of what he had lost. He carried guilt like a weight on his shoulders. At night, when Luna was asleep, he would sit in his office, staring at nothing, thinking about the past. The silence during those nights was even deeper. No calls, no meetings, just silence. His friends had stopped calling. His employees managed the companies without him. He didn't care anymore. All that mattered was Luna. He thought maybe if he could make her better, he could forgive himself. But day after day, Luna stayed silent, and Richard stayed broken. The mansion was big, with many rooms, but Richard and Luna only used a few. Most of the time, they stayed in her room or the living room. Richard tried to make the house more cheerful. He painted Luna's room in her favorite color and filled it with stuffed animals and soft blankets, but it didn't make much of a difference. Luna still looked distant. Sometimes she would draw, but her drawings were simple and sad. Clouds, empty trees, quiet houses. Richard kept those drawings, thinking maybe they showed how she felt inside. He also placed soft music in the background, thinking it might calm her. He even asked some of Luna's old friends to visit, but she didn't show much interest. After a while, the visits stopped. The only thing that remained constant was the silence. Richard tried to talk to her every day, but she rarely answered. He didn't stop trying, though. He never gave up on her. As time went on, Richard continued his efforts. Every day was a repeat of the last, but he always hoped that something might change. Sometimes Luna would look at him a little longer or hold his hand for a few seconds. Those small moments gave him hope. He clung to them like they meant everything. He didn't expect a miracle. He just wanted to hear her voice again or see her smile, even once. Richard wasn't the man he used to be. His world had shrunk to one goal, helping his daughter feel alive again. He read books on trauma, talked to therapists, and tried to learn everything he could about childhood illness and emotional recovery. But no matter how much he learned, the silence between them remained. Richard protected Luna the best he could, but inside he knew. He couldn't force her to come back to the world. All he could do was wait beside her in the quiet, just like always. Julia Bennett had gone through something very painful. Just a few months earlier, she had lost her newborn daughter after complications during childbirth. The loss was heavy, and nothing in her life felt the same. She had quit her old job and moved to a smaller apartment. Every corner of her home reminded her of the baby she had held for only a short time. Julia didn't speak much to others and spent her days in silence. One morning, while browsing job ads online, she saw a post looking for someone to work in a large house, helping with light chores and caring for a young girl. The job didn't ask for specific experience, just someone patient and responsible. Julia felt something pull her toward it. Maybe it was the mention of the child, or maybe it was the idea of starting fresh in a quiet place. Without overthinking, she applied for the job. When Julia arrived at the mansion, the first thing she noticed was how quiet everything was. The house was large and well kept, but it didn't feel warm or welcoming. It was too clean, too silent. Richard Wakefield met her at the front door. He didn't smile, but he spoke kindly. He explained that the job wasn't exactly like working in a normal house. His daughter Luna was very sick and didn't speak much. He didn't expect much from Julia at first, just someone who could help with cleaning, small tasks, and keep a respectful distance. Julia accepted the terms and moved into a small guest room in the back of the house. The other staff members didn't stay long. They came and went quickly, saying the job was too difficult, but Julia didn't feel overwhelmed. She was used to pain and silence. Something about the house reminded her of how she felt inside, calm on the outside, hurting on the inside. In the first few days, Julia did her tasks quietly. She cleaned the kitchen, organized the books in the study, and helped the nurse carry medical supplies upstairs. She didn't try to talk to Luna right away. Instead, she watched from a distance. Luna spent most of her time in her bedroom or sitting near the window. She never asked for anything and rarely responded to anyone. Julia noticed that the girl didn't even look at people when they spoke to her. But what struck Julia the most was not just Luna's illness. It was the way Luna looked completely alone. It wasn't just physical weakness. There was emotional emptiness too. Julia recognized that kind of silence. It was the same kind of emptiness she had felt after losing her own child. She didn't see Luna as just another girl who needed help. She saw someone who had lost something inside, just like she had. Julia began to make small, quiet efforts to connect with Luna. She didn't speak too much. Instead, she tried using actions. She would leave a warm blanket folded neatly at the foot of Luna's bed. She placed fresh flowers on the nightstand, not bright ones, but soft colors, nothing too strong. One afternoon, she brought a small music box and left it nearby. She didn't say anything about it, but she saw Luna turn her head when the music played. It was a small reaction, but it was something. Julia also sat outside Luna's room sometimes, reading quietly. She didn't force anything. She simply wanted to be close without making Luna uncomfortable. Over time, Luna started glancing at her, then holding eye contact for a few seconds. Julia always responded with a soft smile, never pushing too hard. She knew that building trust with someone in pain took time and patience. Richard noticed the difference. At first, he didn't say anything, but he paid attention. Unlike other employees, Julia never tried to impress him or ask too many questions. She wasn't overly cheerful, and she didn't act like she could fix things. She just did her work and treated Luna with quiet respect. Richard felt something shift in the air. Julia's presence wasn't loud, but it filled a space that had been empty for too long. One evening, he walked past Luna's door and saw the girl holding the small music box Julia had given her. It was the first time in months she had picked something up on her own. That night, Richard called Julia into his office and thanked her, not with big words, just a simple thank you that meant a lot. He didn't ask her to do more. He just told her to keep being herself. That was enough. As the days passed, Julia and Luna developed a quiet understanding. There were no long conversations, but small moments started to appear. Luna would let Julia brush her hair or sit beside her without moving away. Sometimes Julia would bring her a drawing pad and find a new picture later, drawn in pencil. These small things told Julia that Luna was starting to trust her. She didn't expect fast progress, and she didn't expect everything to get better quickly, but she believed in the power of connection. The pain that Julia carried helped her see Luna differently, not as a patient, but as a person. She didn't try to fix Luna's sadness. She simply stayed close, gently reminding her that she wasn't alone. It wasn't a job for Julia. It was something more. She felt that maybe, through helping Luna, she could also begin to heal a part of herself that had been broken for so long. Julia had been working in the mansion for a few weeks now. Her days were mostly the same. She cleaned the rooms, prepared small things for Luna, and kept herself busy without making noise. She had gotten used to the quiet environment. It was almost normal to her now. One afternoon, Julia was helping Luna get ready after a nap. The girl had started to let Julia get closer. That day, she offered to brush the small strands of hair that were slowly growing back on Luna's head. She used a soft brush and moved carefully, not wanting to hurt her. Suddenly, Luna moved slightly and said something in a low voice. Julia froze when she heard the words, "It hurts. Don't touch, Mommy." Her hand stopped in the air. She didn't say anything right away. Her mind was processing what had just happened. Luna had called her Mommy. That moment didn't feel like an accident. Julia stayed very still, unsure of what to do. Luna's voice had sounded afraid, like the pain she felt was more than just on the outside. Julia looked at her gently, but Luna didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the floor, holding the edge of her shirt. Julia slowly placed the brush down and said, "Okay, we're done for now." She didn't ask questions, didn't push for an explanation, but inside, her mind was racing. Luna had never said much before. She had always been quiet, barely reacting. This time was different. It wasn't just the word Mommy that stood out, it was the tone. There was emotion behind it, a kind of fear or memory. Julia didn't know what to think, but she knew that something was off. Luna's reaction wasn't just about the brush. It was about something else. Something that Julia didn't understand yet, but she felt the need to find out. After leaving Luna's room, Julia walked slowly through the hallway. Her steps were automatic. Her thoughts were elsewhere. She replayed that moment in her head over and over again. She thought about how Luna had said the word "mommy" like it was part of something from the past. Julia had lost a child herself, so she understood how powerful that word could be. But Luna had a mother who had died. That was what Richard had told her when she was first hired. Was it possible that Luna was confusing her with someone from a memory, or was it something deeper? Julia started to feel an odd discomfort. Something about the situation didn't fit. The way Luna had reacted was so specific, like she was reliving a moment. Julia didn't want to imagine anything bad, but she couldn't shake the strange feeling. A silent doubt began to form inside her, a doubt that wouldn't go away easily. In the days that followed, Julia paid closer attention. She didn't act differently on the outside, but her eyes were sharper now. She noticed how Luna avoided some kinds of touch. Sometimes she flinched when someone walked too close behind her. Other times, she became very quiet when Richard entered the room. None of these things were dramatic or obvious, but when added together, they made Julia feel uneasy. She also began to wonder why Luna never spoke about her mother. Children often talked about parents who passed away, but Luna said nothing. Julia asked Richard once, in a casual tone, if Luna ever talked about her mother. He gave a short answer. Not really. He didn't seem open to continue that topic. That response only increased Julia's doubt. It wasn't just about what was said. It was about what was never said. The silence around Luna's past started to feel heavier than before. One evening, while organizing some books in the study, Julia found a photo album. It was covered in dust and stored behind several thick folders. Curious, she opened it. There were pictures of Richard, a woman, and a baby. She guessed the woman must have been Richard's wife. They looked like a happy family in those old pictures. But there were only a few photos, and after the third page, the rest of the album was blank. Julia felt like something had been taken out. There were no pictures of Luna growing up, no school photos, no birthday parties. It was like her life had been paused. Julia closed the album and put it back exactly where she found it. She didn't want to cause trouble. But the questions were growing louder in her head. Why was Luna's history so empty? Why did Richard always avoid certain topics? Something was being hidden. She was sure of it now. From that moment, Julia couldn't ignore her feelings anymore. She started looking for little clues, not because she wanted to invade anyone's privacy, but because she felt a responsibility. She had come to that house only to work, but now she cared about Luna deeply. That one word, "mommy," had changed everything. It had opened a door inside Julia's heart and mind. She knew what it meant to lose a child, to miss someone who would never return. But Luna's pain seemed different. It wasn't just loss, it was confusion, fear, and maybe even something darker. Julia didn't want to jump to conclusions. She didn't think badly of Richard, but she needed to understand the truth. Something inside her was pushing her to uncover what really happened in that house. She didn't have a clear plan. All she had was that single moment, that single word from Luna that had planted a silent, growing doubt. Julia had started to explore more areas of the mansion during her free time. She didn't do it out of curiosity alone. It was a quiet search for understanding. The house had many storage rooms and locked cabinets. One afternoon, while cleaning a room near the basement stairs, she opened an old closet. Inside were several cardboard boxes with labels. Most of the writing was faded, but some still had names of medications on them. She pulled one box down and opened it. Inside, there were pill bottles, injection kits, and some vials with medical labels she had never seen before. The dates were from years ago, and the labels mentioned Luna's name. As Julia looked through the contents, she noticed something strange. Many of the drugs were not common. Some had warnings in red letters. Others had strange names that didn't seem familiar. Julia decided to take a few photos with her phone to look up later. That night, after Luna was asleep and the house was quiet, Julia sat on her bed and started researching the names of the medications. Some results came up right away. A few were regular drugs used in cancer treatments, but others were harder to find. She finally found information on a few that were listed as experimental use only, especially in children. The side effects were serious: organ damage, hormonal disruption, and psychological effects. One drug had even been suspended in some countries due to safety concerns. Julia's heart beat faster. She now understood why Luna's body was so weak and why she reacted with such sensitivity. These were not normal treatments. Why were these used on her? Who approved this? Julia couldn't shake the idea that something had gone wrong. Maybe Luna had been given these without proper medical oversight. She felt sick at the thought. This wasn't just about sickness anymore. This was about possible harm. Julia didn't sleep well that night. Her mind kept spinning with possibilities. She tried to imagine what Richard knew. Did he approve those medications? Did he know about the risks, or was he trusting a doctor blindly without checking the full details? The more Julia thought, the more questions she had, but she didn't have answers. She wanted to confront Richard right away, but something held her back. What if he truly believed he was helping Luna? What if he didn't know? And worse, what if he did know but kept going anyway? Julia didn't want to accuse anyone without proof, but the fear inside her was growing. She had seen how fragile Luna was, how quiet and distant. Now she wondered if part of that was caused by the treatments themselves. Maybe they weren't just side effects. Maybe they were part of something much bigger, something wrong. Julia now felt responsible for finding out the truth. The next day, Julia continued her tasks as usual, but her focus had changed. She watched everything more closely. When the nurse brought in Luna's daily medicine, Julia paid attention to the labels, the dosages, and the nurse's behavior. She didn't say anything, just observed. She also checked the cabinets in the bathroom again, comparing the current medicines with the ones she had found in storage. Some names matched. That made her even more nervous. She also started looking at Luna's medical files, which were kept in Richard's office. She didn't take anything, but she glanced at some of the notes when Richard stepped out. One folder had lab reports with unfamiliar terms. Julia wrote them down to research later. The deeper she looked, the more she felt something was not right. Her hands shook a little when she closed the folder. This wasn't just guessing anymore. Something serious was being hidden, and it involved Luna's health directly. Julia knew she couldn't carry this alone for long, but telling Richard was a big step. If he was innocent, she might scare him. If he was guilty, she might put herself at risk. So she chose to wait a bit longer. She wanted more proof. She wanted to understand everything before saying anything. At the same time, the weight in her chest was growing. She was starting to care deeply for Luna. The girl trusted her now. They shared small smiles, quiet moments, even brief conversations. Julia couldn't sit by and do nothing if something dangerous was still happening. Every time Luna took a pill or received an injection, Julia watched with worry. She started keeping a notebook where she wrote down everything: names, times, reactions. It was her way of staying in control. She needed a plan, but most of all, she needed to protect Luna, even if it meant going against people with more power. Days passed, and the truth continued to unfold in small pieces. Julia had now built a collection of notes, photos, and questions, but she still didn't know how to act. The responsibility was becoming too much. What she had discovered couldn't be ignored. Luna was not just sick. She was possibly harmed by decisions made by adults around her. Julia didn't want to believe that Richard would do such a thing on purpose, but she also couldn't fully trust him anymore. She didn't know who had made those choices, but they weren't right. The girl deserved better. Julia looked at Luna differently now, not as someone who was simply unlucky, but as someone who had been failed. This thought hurt deeply. The connection Julia felt with Luna grew stronger. She wasn't just a worker anymore. She felt like a protector, a guardian. And no matter how difficult the road ahead, she was ready to search for answers. Something very serious was hidden in that house. Julia had grown more careful in everything she did. Each day, she watched Luna more closely, not in a way that made the girl feel uncomfortable, but with quiet attention. She noticed the small things, how Luna reacted to different voices, which objects she avoided, and when she seemed more relaxed. Julia didn't try to ask too many questions or push Luna to talk. Instead, she stayed near, always calm, always available. Julia had realized that trust would not come with words, but with presence. And little by little, Luna began to change. She started looking directly into Julia's eyes. She no longer pulled away when Julia sat beside her. These were small moments, but to Julia, they meant everything. She felt something shifting between them. It was no longer just about taking care of Luna physically. It was becoming something deeper. Julia knew she was getting closer to the heart of the girl's silent world. One afternoon, the house was especially quiet. Richard had gone out for a meeting, and the nurse had stepped away to take a phone call. Julia was in the living room with Luna. The girl was lying on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket. Julia sat on the floor nearby, organizing some books. There was no music, no noise, just silence. Then something unexpected happened. Luna sat up slowly and looked at Julia. Her eyes didn't seem scared this time. Instead, they looked tired, like she was carrying something heavy. Luna crawled toward her, gently leaned forward, and placed her arms around Julia's neck. The hug was light but real. Julia didn't move at first, surprised by the sudden closeness. Then she wrapped her arms around Luna, holding her carefully. That was when Luna whispered something. Very softly, almost too soft to hear, she said, "Don't leave me, Mommy." Julia felt her body freeze. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. Julia didn't say anything right away. Her throat was tight and her heart was pounding. She just held Luna, staying completely still. The words, "Don't leave me, Mommy," echoed in her mind over and over again. She could feel Luna's small arms wrapped tightly around her. It wasn't a simple hug. It wasn't a mistake. It was full of fear, of a deep wish to not be alone. Julia didn't know if Luna meant to call her that, or if it was a memory from the past coming forward, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that Luna had let her in. Julia could feel it. This wasn't just affection, it was trust. It was a cry for safety. Julia gently kissed the top of Luna's head and whispered, "I'm not going anywhere." She meant every word. The tears kept falling, but she didn't wipe them. For the first time, Luna had spoken from the heart. That moment stayed in Julia's mind long after the hug ended. She didn't want to overthink it, but she knew what it meant. It was a sign that Luna saw her as someone safe. For a child who barely spoke, who barely reacted to anything, calling someone Mommy was not small. Julia had never tried to replace anyone or take on a role that didn't belong to her. But now she realized she had become something important in Luna's life. She had become someone who mattered. That thought gave her a strong feeling, part love, part responsibility. Julia spent the rest of the day quiet, thinking deeply about what had happened. She also started to feel a kind of pressure. If Luna trusted her this much, she couldn't walk away. She had to protect her. It was no longer just about staying close. Now it was about fighting for her, no matter what that meant. Julia didn't tell Richard what Luna had said. Not yet. She didn't know how he would react, and she wasn't sure it was the right time. This moment felt like something sacred, something that belonged only to her and Luna. From that day forward, Julia stayed even closer. She adjusted her schedule to be near Luna more often. They read books together, played simple games, and shared quiet meals. Luna didn't speak again right away, but she started touching Julia's hand or leaning her head against her shoulder. These actions were louder than words. Julia understood that a wall had started to fall. She also understood that her job in the house was no longer just a job. She was there for a reason. She had been placed there not by chance, but by something greater. Maybe not fate, but something real. Julia didn't plan to leave. She was ready to be whatever Luna needed. The more time passed, the more Julia felt certain. She had been chosen, not by Richard. Not by some hiring process, but by Luna. In her own quiet, innocent way, the girl had picked Julia to be her safe person, and that meant everything. The moment Luna had said those words, "Don't leave me, Mommy," it was more than just a mistake or a memory. It was a true request, a call for love, for protection, for someone to stay. Julia knew now that she couldn't walk away. She couldn't let fear or doubt stop her. Luna needed someone to fight for her, to listen, to believe, and Julia was ready to be that person. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because love, even unspoken, had formed between them. In that quiet room during that short hug, something powerful was born. Julia had become more than a caretaker. She had become a guardian. Richard had returned early from a meeting, earlier than usual. He didn't tell anyone. He entered the house through the back door and walked toward Luna's room, where he heard soft voices. The door was slightly open. As he got closer, he saw Julia sitting beside Luna on the floor, gently holding her as the girl leaned her head on her chest. Julia was speaking softly, calming her. It was a quiet moment, full of care. Richard stopped at the door, watching. After a few seconds, he stepped inside without warning. His voice was cold. "What are you doing?" Julia stood up quickly, confused by his tone. Richard looked angry. "Are you trying to take advantage of her? She's fragile. She doesn't think clearly." Julia was shocked. She tried to explain, but Richard didn't listen. He thought Julia was crossing a line. His voice grew louder. But then, something happened that neither of them expected. Luna looked up, clearly nervous, and suddenly ran toward Julia. She wrapped her arms tightly around her waist. "Mommy, don't let him yell," she said, loud enough for Richard to hear. The room went completely quiet. Richard's face changed instantly. He looked at Luna, then at Julia. His hands dropped to his sides. He didn't say a word for a few seconds. Luna was holding on to Julia like she was afraid. Julia gently rested her hand on Luna's back and didn't say anything. She let the moment speak for itself. Richard's expression shifted from anger to confusion, then to something heavier, realization. He didn't know what to do with what he just saw. He had never seen Luna react that way before. She had always been quiet, disconnected, passive, but now she had spoken. She had reached out, and not to him, but to Julia. That single moment hit Richard harder than any argument could have. Richard sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking older. His voice was quiet now. "She called you, Mommy?" Julia nodded slowly. She wasn't proud or smug. She looked just as overwhelmed. "It just happened," she said. "She needed someone, and I was there." Richard didn't respond right away. He looked at his daughter. For the first time in years, he really looked, not just at her physical condition, but at her behavior, her emotions. He saw her fear, her sadness, her need for protection. And he realized something. Maybe her weakness wasn't only from the cancer. Maybe something else had been harming her. Maybe it was the years of strong treatments, isolation, silence. He stood up and walked out of the room, not saying another word. Julia stayed with Luna, holding her hand. They both stayed quiet. That moment had changed everything. Something had broken open in Richard, and it couldn't be ignored anymore. Later that night, Richard went into his office and sat at his desk for a long time. He didn't turn on his computer. He didn't make any calls. Instead, he opened Luna's medical file and started reading everything again. He looked at the medication list, at the dosages, at the doctor's recommendations. Some of the drugs now seemed wrong, too strong. He noticed that some were experimental, and he remembered what Julia had told him weeks ago, things he hadn't taken seriously at the time. Without calling anyone, he made a quiet decision. The next morning, he told the nurse to stop using several of the medications. He didn't give a reason. He just said they were no longer needed. The nurse looked confused, but followed the instruction. Richard didn't explain himself to Julia either. He wasn't ready, but inside, something was changing. He no longer believed the same story he had believed for years. Over the next few days, Julia noticed small differences in Luna. They weren't huge changes, but they were clear. Luna seemed more awake. She ate a little more, showed interest in a coloring book, and even asked Julia to read a story twice. These were things she had never done before. Julia didn't know what had changed, but she kept track. She paid attention to Luna's sleep, her mood, her energy. It was like the girl was slowly coming back to life. Richard observed from a distance. He didn't interfere, but he watched everything. He saw Luna smile once, something he hadn't seen in months. That single smile hit him harder than any medical report. He started to wonder if stopping the medications had helped. If maybe, after all this time, the treatment wasn't the cure. It had been part of the problem. That thought scared him, but also gave him something new: hope. Richard didn't talk much about what happened that day, but the scene stayed in his mind. The way Luna had clung to Julia, the way she had called her mommy, and the way she had finally shown emotion. He knew now that something had to change. He couldn't rely only on doctors or routines. He had to listen. Not just with his ears, but with his eyes, with his heart. For the first time in years, he saw that his daughter was still there, behind all the silence and sickness. She had just needed the right person to help her speak. Julia had become that person. Richard didn't know what would happen next, but he understood that he couldn't go back to the way things were. He had seen the truth, and with that truth, something inside him opened up again. After years of numbness, he felt something real, a small but powerful hope. Julia had been carrying a heavy suspicion for days. She couldn't stop thinking about the medications Luna had taken and the small improvements she showed after some of them were removed. Julia didn't want to act without proof, but her gut told her something was wrong. One afternoon, when the house was quiet, she went into the storage cabinet in the hallway. She carefully took one of the medicine vials and wrapped it in a cloth. She placed it in her purse and waited until her day off. Julia didn't want to make any mistakes, so she went straight to someone she trusted, her old friend Carla, a doctor who worked at a small private clinic. Carla had known Julia for years, and when Julia explained everything, Carla agreed to send the medication for lab analysis. Julia felt nervous, but also sure that she had done the right thing. She needed to know the truth, no matter what. 2 days later, Carla called her back. Her voice was serious, almost cold. "Julia, we got the results," she said. "You were right to worry." Carla explained that the vial contained a powerful drug used in rare adult treatments, not something recommended for children, especially not in the dose found inside. It was 3 times the amount considered safe, even in emergency situations. The substance could cause extreme fatigue, damage to internal organs, and suppress normal brain function in a child. Julia sat down, shaking. She felt sick to her stomach. She couldn't believe Luna had been given this for so long. Carla continued explaining that the drug was not illegal, but it was classified for special cases only. Julia thanked her and hung up. Her hands were cold. She had confirmation now. This wasn't just about over-medication, it was about something deeply wrong. Someone had made choices that put Luna in serious danger, and Julia knew exactly who. The name on all the prescriptions was the same, Dr. Atticus Morrow. He was the one Richard had trusted since Luna's diagnosis. Julia remembered the man. He was always polite but distant. He spoke in complicated terms, making it hard for anyone to question him. Now Julia couldn't help but wonder how many people had been fooled by him. She brought the report straight to Richard. She didn't want to hide anything. She sat across from him in the office and told him everything. Richard read the report slowly, his face growing pale. At first he was silent. Then he spoke in a voice that didn't sound like his usual self. "I trusted him," he said. "He promised he could save her." Julia placed a hand on the table, trying to keep him grounded. "We need to know more," she said. Richard nodded. For the first time, he didn't look like a businessman. He looked like a father who had been tricked. Together, they started digging into the doctor's background. Richard used his contacts to access old records, and Julia searched online forums and news archives. It didn't take long to find what they feared. Dr. Morrow had already been involved in investigations years earlier. There were reports of questionable treatments and legal disputes with families. In one case, a boy had developed heart problems after receiving similar medications under Morrow's care. The case had been closed quietly, with no charges filed, but the signs were all there. Julia felt her anger grow. How could someone like this still be practicing? Richard found more files, more stories, more families who had suffered. Some had tried to sue, but many had given up after long court battles. Reading their stories was painful. Luna wasn't the only one. Julia and Richard were now sure this wasn't just one mistake. This was part of a pattern, a history of damage disguised as treatment. As the evidence grew, so did their sense of betrayal. Richard felt the full weight of his mistake. He had believed in Dr. Morrow completely. He had followed every recommendation, thinking it would save his daughter. Now he realized he had been blind. Julia didn't blame him. She knew how fear and desperation could cloud a person's mind, but that didn't make what happened any less serious. Richard stopped taking calls. He spent hours reviewing documents, searching names and contacting families. Some were open to talk, others didn't want to revisit the past. But each story added more pain and more fuel to their mission. They weren't just angry, they were determined. Julia had started this for Luna. Now she saw it was bigger than that. This wasn't just about one child. It was about many others who had been hurt quietly, behind the walls of hospitals and clinics. They had to do something. They couldn't stay silent anymore. In the middle of all this, Luna remained unaware of the details. Julia and Richard kept things calm around her. But inside, everything had changed. They had made a decision. They would not stop until Dr. Morrow was exposed. They began preparing a case. Carla agreed to testify if needed. Other families were slowly joining. A lawyer got involved. What started with one vial of medicine had now turned into a real fight for justice. Julia felt stronger than ever. Her role in Luna's life had gone beyond care. It had become protection. Richard, once lost in guilt and denial, now stood beside her. The betrayal hurt, but the new purpose gave them strength. They had been fooled by a man in a white coat, but now they had the truth, and with it, a reason to act. It was no longer just about Luna. It was about making sure no other child would suffer the same way. Richard and Julia had everything they needed. They organized the medical reports, documents, testimonies, and drug lab results into a full case. With the help of the lawyer and support from some of the other families affected by Dr. Morrow's actions, they took everything to the district attorney's office. The prosecutor listened carefully and promised to begin a formal investigation. Not long after, more information came to light. Dr. Morrow was not just careless, He had a connection with certain pharmaceutical companies. He was receiving payments to test new, unapproved medications on vulnerable patients. Children like Luna had been used as part of those secret drug trials. The story was shocking. As more evidence appeared, the media began to take interest. News channels and websites reported on the case. Public pressure grew fast. People wanted answers. Richard and Julia had started something big, something that could finally bring justice not only for Luna, but for many others. But not everyone wanted the truth to come out. Soon after the case gained attention, problems started. One morning, a news article appeared online accusing Richard of being an absent father who ignored Luna's care. Another headline suggested that Julia had tricked her way into the house and was manipulating the child for attention. These were lies, but they spread quickly. People online shared the stories without checking facts. Richard received strange emails saying he was a terrible parent. Julia found printed notes under her car's windshield telling her to stay quiet. Anonymous text messages told them to stop the case or face consequences. The lawyer warned them that these types of attacks were common in big lawsuits, especially when large companies were involved. Richard was furious, but Julia stayed calm. "We expected this," she said. "If they're scared, it means we're doing something right." Neither of them thought about giving up. They had come too far already. As the court case moved forward, more people came forward with stories of mistreatment. Some had been afraid to speak before, but now they saw that Richard and Julia were not backing down. One mother shared how her son had seizures after a treatment given by Morrow. Another father said his daughter developed liver problems from similar medications. All these voices helped make the case stronger. Behind the scenes, lawyers built timelines, cross-checked prescription logs, and uncovered secret financial records. The companies involved denied everything at first, but the evidence was too strong. Even the media that had spread lies began to change their tone. Some reporters apologized, others started showing the truth. Richard and Julia stayed focused. They didn't let the noise distract them. Every day, they checked in on Luna, made sure she was comfortable, and kept pushing the case forward. They were tired, but more determined than ever to finish what they had started. While all of this was happening, something beautiful began to take place inside the mansion. Luna, who had once been weak, silent, and always tired, started to change. She was still fragile, but her energy was better. She started drawing again, often asking Julia to sit beside her while she colored. She laughed sometimes, not loudly, but real. She smiled when Richard brought her favorite snacks. Her eyes looked brighter, more awake. She even asked to go outside into the garden. These moments gave Richard and Julia strength. They still had a long legal road ahead, but inside the house, there was hope. The walls that had once held silence now echoed with soft voices, with footsteps, with music in the background. Life was returning to a place that had once felt frozen. The darkness that had surrounded them was lifting, little by little. And it all began with Luna's quiet recovery and growing trust. There were still hard days. Court meetings were long. Some people still believed the lies. Richard struggled with guilt. He kept saying, "I should have seen it sooner." Julia reminded him that what mattered was what they were doing now. They were no longer powerless. They were acting, speaking up, changing something. Even Luna noticed the difference. One night, as Julia tucked her in, Luna said, "You and Daddy are brave." Julia smiled and held her hand. It was the kind of sentence that stayed with her. Richard and Julia had both changed. They were no longer just individuals trying to survive grief or guilt. They had become a team, stronger together than alone. The fight was not just legal, it was emotional, personal, and deep. They were facing powerful people, but they had something more powerful pushing them forward. The love for a child who had once been forgotten and now had a voice through them. By the time the case reached national television, Richard and Julia had already accepted that their lives would never be the same. But they didn't mind. They weren't seeking fame or attention. Their goal was justice. They wanted answers, responsibility, and above all, change. Every time they walked into a courtroom or gave another statement, they carried Luna in their hearts. The girl who used to whisper and hide now smiled in the hallway and showed her drawings proudly. The mansion that once felt empty now had warmth and movement. They were living between two worlds, one of legal battles and another of small daily victories. But they found strength in both. They had discovered that no threat, no lie, no headline could stop them. What they were fighting for was too important. It wasn't just about Luna anymore. It was about many other children, past and future. They would not stop. Justice had become their mission. After months of investigation, the case against Dr. Atticus Morrow finally reached the courtroom. The prosecutor had gathered enough evidence to arrest him, and he was taken into custody while the trial was being prepared. As the trial began, news of the case continued to spread. More families started to come forward. One by one, parents stepped into the courtroom, telling their own painful stories. Many had children who suffered unusual side effects. Others had lost loved ones. The pattern was clear. Dr. Morrow had been using experimental drugs on children without their full knowledge or consent. Some families cried while giving their testimony. Others were angry and firm. The courtroom was full every day. Reporters sat in the back, taking notes. Outside, people held signs demanding justice. Julia and Richard sat together in the front row, prepared to share everything they had learned. They were no longer alone. This had become much bigger than their story. Julia was one of the first witnesses to testify. She walked to the stand calmly, holding a small folder with notes, but she didn't need to read them. Her voice was steady as she told the court how she found the medicine, how she contacted her doctor friend, and how the tests revealed dangerous substances. She explained Luna's condition, her slow recovery after the medications were stopped, and how she discovered Dr. Morrow's past. Julia didn't raise her voice or get emotional. She simply told the truth in clear and simple words. The judge and jury listened closely. Her testimony was detailed, logical, and strong. After her statement, she returned to her seat and quietly held Richard's hand. Richard followed not long after. When it was his turn, he stood in front of the courtroom and admitted he had made a terrible mistake. He said he had trusted too much and questioned too little. His honesty earned respect from everyone watching. Richard's statement wasn't full of excuses. He didn't try to hide behind grief or confusion. He admitted his failure to protect his daughter sooner and shared how guilt had consumed him for years. He said that if not for Julia, he might have never seen the truth. He told the court how he used to believe that doing everything a doctor said was the safest path, but now he understood that blind trust could be dangerous. People in the courtroom nodded as he spoke. He didn't cry, but it was clear that he was deeply affected. The lawyer for the prosecution later said that Richard's words helped the case more than expected. They showed how even smart, capable adults could be misled by a system that hides behind complex language and medical authority. After their testimonies, Julia and Richard sat in silence, watching as more parents came forward. Each new voice added strength to the case against Dr. Morrow. Luna did not appear in court. She was still recovering, and Richard and Julia agreed that it was better for her to stay home, safe from the media and stress. But Luna's presence was still felt. During the third day of the trial, one of her drawings was presented as part of the evidence. It was a simple picture, a little girl standing between two people holding hands. The girl had no hair, but she was smiling. Underneath, Luna had written, "I feel safe now." The courtroom was quiet as the judge looked at the picture. Some people wiped tears from their eyes. The drawing was not used to prove medical details, but it became a symbol of what the trial was about: healing, truth, and the need to protect children. It reminded everyone that behind every report and piece of evidence was a real child with a real life and a future that could not be ignored. The final part of the trial came quickly. After hearing all the testimonies and reviewing the documents, the jury took only 2 days to reach a decision. On the morning of the verdict, the courtroom was full. Reporters stood outside with cameras ready. Inside, families sat close together, holding hands. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, there was no loud celebration. Instead, there was silence, followed by deep breaths and quiet tears. Dr. Morrow sat still, showing no reaction. The judge sentenced him to a long prison term and at the same time announced that the medical board had begun reviewing all patient safety regulations. New laws were being proposed to limit the use of experimental treatments, especially on children. Julia and Richard didn't say much after the hearing. They just stood up, hugged the lawyer, and left the courtroom. They had done everything they could. Now they could finally breathe without fear. Back at the mansion, the mood was completely different from how it had been months before. The house that once felt cold and distant now felt warm and peaceful. Luna was drawing again. She spent time in the garden, laughing with Julia and asking questions about everything. Richard joined them often, no longer distant or quiet. They talked about school, future trips, and simple things like baking or fixing the old swing in the backyard. Julia stayed, not as an employee, but as family. The trial had ended, but their lives were just beginning a new chapter. They had faced pain, guilt, and fear. But now they were moving forward with love, trust, and peace. Justice had been served, but more importantly, hope had returned. What had started as a search for answers had become something greater, a fight that protected many children and gave a new chance to a little girl who had once been forgotten. After everything they had been through, life finally began to feel normal for Luna. With the legal battle behind them and the house filled with peace, Richard and Julia decided it was time for Luna to experience something she had never fully had: a regular childhood. They enrolled her in a local school. Julia helped her prepare every morning, packing her lunch and fixing her clothes. Richard drove her on the first day. Everyone was nervous, especially Luna. She hadn't been around other children in a long time, but to their surprise, she adapted quickly. Her classmates welcomed her, and the teachers quickly noticed her talent in drawing. Her notebooks were filled with colorful images, showing scenes from her past, her dreams, and her new life. The girl who once barely spoke was now answering questions in class, raising her hand with confidence and making new friends. She had found her voice, not through medicine, but through connection. As the school year passed, Luna continued to grow. She was still small and had to visit doctors occasionally, but her energy improved. She joined a small art group at school and began winning small awards for her drawings. One day, the school counselor nominated her for a national award recognizing courage in young students. Luna was invited to a formal event where she stood on stage and received a medal for bravery. Reporters took pictures. Her name was mentioned in local newspapers. The attention didn't make her nervous. Instead, she smiled proudly, holding the medal in one hand and Julia's hand in the other. Julia stood beside her, emotional but proud. Richard sat in the audience, wiping away tears. He knew how far his daughter had come. Luna started receiving letters from other kids who were going through hard times. Some said her story gave them hope. Her journey was inspiring others, even outside the walls of their home. One afternoon, Julia was called to attend a school event. She thought it was a regular assembly, but something special had been planned. When she arrived, she saw Luna waiting on stage, holding a small envelope. A woman from the Child Services Department stood beside her. As the audience grew quiet, Luna stepped forward and read a small card aloud. "Today, I want to share something important. Julia has always been more than someone who cared for me. She's my mother in every way that matters." The woman beside her then announced that Julia was now, officially and legally, Luna's adoptive mother. Julia was completely shocked. Her hands covered her mouth as she began to cry. She walked up to the stage, hugged Luna tightly, and held onto her for a long time. The room clapped, some people crying, others smiling. That moment marked a turning point, not just for Julia and Luna, but for everyone watching. After that, their bond only grew stronger. Julia helped Luna set up a small art studio at home. Richard cleared out a bright room near the garden and turned it into Luna's creative space. There were paints, canvases, shelves for supplies, and a desk by the window. Luna began to create art every day. Her drawings became more complex, with deeper meaning and strong emotion. Years passed quickly. Luna became a teenager, then a young adult. Her passion for art remained, and she decided to study it seriously. She applied to an art school and was accepted with a scholarship. Julia helped pack her bags, and Richard drove her to campus. Although it was hard to say goodbye, they both knew Luna was ready. Her strength had come from surviving something most kids never face. But even more than that, from the love and safety she found at home. Now she was ready to share her story through art. Several years later, Luna sent invitations to everyone she loved. She was holding her first professional art exhibition. It would feature pieces that showed her personal journey through sickness, fear, recovery, and love. The event was held in a quiet gallery downtown. People walked in and saw her drawings hung on clean white walls. One showed a small girl curled up in a hospital bed. Another showed a woman sitting beside her, holding her hand. Others were more colorful, full of life and movement. Each piece told part of her story. At the opening night, Luna stood at the front of the room and gave a speech. Her voice was clear, her words thoughtful. "People think my strength came from medicine," she said. "But the truth is, my first strength came from Julia's heart. She loved me when I was hard to love. She stayed when I didn't ask. She became the light I followed." The room fell silent. As Luna finished her speech, the audience stood up and clapped. Julia wiped her eyes, and Richard smiled with pride. Other guests cried quietly, touched by her honesty. It wasn't just an art show. It was a celebration of life, healing, and love. People walked around the gallery, looking at each piece with new understanding. Luna walked beside Julia, holding her hand like she used to. But this time, she wasn't the fragile girl needing protection. She was the artist, the survivor, and the voice for others who had once been silent. That night, they all went home knowing something had changed. Luna's past would always be part of her, but it no longer controlled her. She had taken it, shaped it, and turned it into something beautiful. It was no longer just a memory of pain. It was a message of hope. The little girl who once lived in silence had become a woman who knew how to live. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.